There's Johnny.
It's Johnny from The Shining, guys.
I'm Greg.
I'm Johnny.
We're gonna watch we did watch it. We're gonna review Dr. Sleep today. This takes place, I believe, 40 years after the events of The Shining. Danny Torrance is all grown up, and he looks like Ewan McGregor now.
Yep.
Boy, did he luck out.
Yeah, he really did, especially for the life he's had.
Yeah, you look great, dude.
He doesn't look so rough when he cleans up.
If you've seen the trailer for this movie, you know the Overlook Hotel is still around, and I'm saying that because in The Shining book, the Overlook Hotel, spoilers, if you were planning on reading the book, it's different in the movie. The Overlook's still around. In the book, the Overlook Hotel is blown up. As you see in the trailer, the Overlook Hotel still is around, showing that this is going to be a hybrid of both the sequel to the Stanley Kubrick version plus an adaptation of the Stephen King novel of the same name. I was really looking forward to this movie. Mike Flanagan directed, edited, wrote, did the catering service.
He starred in it. He played all the roles.
So impressive.
He was all the extras, too.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his work. Loved all of Haunting of Hill House. Oculus is great. Gerald's Game. Hush. I don't need to list every one of his movies.
Check his IMDb page.
I had a lot of high hopes for this movie because I thought like he would be the perfect person to continue this. And I have a feeling that John and I will be in the minority on certain things. I saw that it has a pretty good Rotten Tomatoes critic score, but a very high audience score. So I imagine that there's going to be some things we say that people will just disagree with. But we got to be honest. We got to be ourselves.
Gotta be authentic.
We got to be real.
Stephen King shills.
Stephen King sucks, guys. No.
Let me tell you something about Steve King.
Being real. Nah, Stephen King's great. For starters, I like this a lot more than It Chapter 2. I'm just going to get that out of the way.
Likewise.
Yes. The things that are solidly great. For starters, Ewan McGregor as grown-up Danny Torrance. That is a very lived-in performance. One thing that you can count on Mike Flanagan, he's going to give a lot of attention to detail on his characters and really give a personal growth journey. This character's haunted by his past, obviously. Now that he's older, he does whatever he can to repress or limit the use of his shine. He's also a struggling alcoholic. Ewan McGregor, I just thought, really captivated every layer to this performance. Yeah. And I thought it was beautifully done. And there were moments where I was like, he does kind of look like Jack Nicholson. There were times where I thought that, yeah.
And he has this, especially when he uses an American accent, he has a very boyish quality to him, or at least that reads to me. And so in a sense, since we all know Danny so well as a child, I felt like he was actually a really nice casting choice. Yes. And especially for the things that he's been through and the kind of softness that's in Danny, I thought he really brought that out.
The villain in this movie is played by Rebecca Ferguson. She plays the Mad Hatter.
Yep. Originally played by Johnny Depp. Rose the Hat.
Rose the Hat. Half of this movie is from beginning to end is dedicated to Rose and this cult that she has.
Yeah, the knot.
Basically, what they do is they feed off of the shine. They specifically hunt down people once in a while who possess this ability, and they feed off of whatever energy that gives them, and they're able to live for a very long time. There are some cool members in that group, but
half the cast of Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah, there were characters I really recognize there. But Rebecca Ferguson, though, every time she's on screen, she steals the spotlight.
She's terrific.
She really, really does shine. Ha 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 ha. She's great. There are some wonderful visual moments in here. I like when Mike Flanagan gets weird with his visuals because he doesn't do that a lot. He uses that sparingly, and he chooses the appropriate moments to do it because it's not like throughout, but when he does it, it's very, very effective. I thought that was great. And to me, the best part of this movie, this is a 2.5-hour film. There's like 45 minutes of setup. It's a lot of setup.
It's a big setup.
There's the middle chunk in this movie, and then, of course, the finale. 3-act structure, right? It kind of feels like a 6-act structure in a way. Yeah.
I mean, and this is adapted from a lot of source materials, so the structure is definitely not typical.
We both felt like this probably needed to be a mini-series, especially because of what Mike Flanagan did with Haunting of Hill House. I don't know if this comes down to comparison in some ways. I don't know how seeped into my brain that is, because there's so much similarities to what's being explored here in Haunting of Hill House. I was like, that's a perfect show.
Yeah.
And then I watched this, and I'm like, there's so much happening and it's moving so fast. That kind of threw me off because, especially coming off of Kubrick's The Shining, which is very deliberately paced, and then just knowing Mike Flanagan's work, very deliberately paced. The first 45 minutes of this film, I thought was kind of jarring in an unusual way. It just seemed like it was moving so fast and we were covering so much ground, and the way the scenes ended didn't really feel like they ended. Scenes usually have a beginning, middle, and end as well. And I felt like a lot of the scenes had a beginning, a middle, and then we fade. Beginning, middle, dissolve. There's like this movie has an obnoxious amount of dissolve and fade throughout. Like he rarely cuts to another scene. It's constantly fade.
The structure of scenes became, here's a little setup or a nugget of information and a button and a transition. And that's kind of how everything moved along. And that's partly why the movie started to come apart to me, is because there were times where I could really feel like, okay, this is written to be a 2-minute scene or you know, like a 60-second scene with a quick transition. The elements started to come apart to me really early. If you've seen Haunting of Hill House, so much of the subject matter and the metaphor is the same. You have Mike Flanagan's overall visual aesthetic. So for me, I felt like I was watching a weird Hill House light clips medley.
Oh no, it's like when they adapt like a show into a movie, or a when they adapt a mini series into a movie.
Yeah, it felt like stilted in a weird way. And so I either felt like, this either should have been really pared down as a story or made into a mini series, because especially like the Luke character is practically Danny for half this movie.
I mean, granted, Stephen King adaptations often have this criticism. A lot is thrown in here, and I will say that even though it suffers, I think, from the same issue, and like I said, maybe a lot of people won't agree with us on that, I think it's better than a lot of those other ones, you know?
It's laid out decently, and it's conscientious about what it's doing. I feel like you can feel certain elements of the studio notes. Like, I feel like this is kind of at war with itself, because to me, this read like it came out of the time that is giving us these big legacy follow-ups. So this reminded me of, like, let's make it more like an It, where it's got a gloss and it's got a sort of Hollywood blockbuster quality or a Conjuring-esque quality.
It's the same, you know, studio.
Exactly. No, exactly. But the thing is, it reminded me of Terminator Dark Fate in the way that it seems like they're not actually emulating the type of film that the original film was. And so that affects the way the whole film moves and breathes.
Well, I mean, he's at war with himself in a weird way, because he has to do the Kubrick sequel and the adaptation of the King novel, where King is very, you know, public about how he doesn't like the Kubrick version because it doesn't feel at all like how he imagined it to be. The middle portion of this movie is really what you see in the trailer. You gotta wait like close to an hour before the stuff in the trailer, the plot setup, like the real plot of this movie kicks in. Cults, the Knot, hearing about this little girl who has like this really advanced shine ability, and then Danny sort of protecting and guiding her, and somehow this is going to link to getting us back to the Overlook Hotel. This middle chunk, like the part of the trailer that they advertise, I really like that. That's where the cool visuals come in. There's some violent stuff that goes down that I was pretty surprised of how much. I'm not like overly surprised, but with a big studio film, I was like, oh wow, they're really committed to that.
There are moments, in the middle that are truly horrific, and when you get to have the mystery still, like the problem is when the movie starts answering questions, it starts to take the tension out. But in the middle part, you have the Knot as this really evil, monstrous group, and for a moment there, you're able to be like, oh god, how are they gonna take these guys? These guys seem horrible. You have also the growing relationship between Abra and Danny from a distance, which is really cool and kind of heartfelt in a way, and the actual title sake of the movie, which is Danny's ability when it comes to helping people on their last moments of life, you know? Those are the most interesting things in the movie.
I felt like there was a lot explored. Then there's a lot of stuff in that first 45 minutes that is set up that I don't actually think is paid off well.
No.
To give some teases of that, there's this blonde character named, they call it Snakebite Andy. She has this cool power. They set her up, and they really don't do much with her.
Yeah, once she joins the team, she's just there.
There's definitely high spoiler moments that we can't go into.
Yeah.
Bruce Greenwood, there's this exchange that happens with Danny Torrance very early on that you think is going to lead somewhere, perhaps a little investigative or suspicious, but nothing becomes of that.
It leads to anything,
Even
really.
the Dr. Sleep stuff doesn't really factor into the main movie.
Not enough to justify calling it that. Yeah, it feels like an interlude at best.
It's more of a thing that occurs. I guess one could argue that it helps serve the journey of Danny Torrance ultimately with exploring where he is. Sure, yeah, absolutely.
It makes sense.
But that's why I think a lot of this probably would have worked better in a miniseries format.
This movie successfully ties its themes together when it wants to, but it doesn't have enough time to flesh them any.
Without spoiling anything, I put out a tweet today, and I tweeted Ryan George at pitch meeting specifically. specifically about this moment. The thing that kicks this plot into high gear, how the cult essentially, what causes this circumstance to happen, and you could read my tweet if you don't want it to get spoiled for you. The second it happened, of how they managed to obtain a certain person,
Yes.
in the middle of the movie, I literally looked to my girlfriend and I eventually whispered to John. I was like, super easy, barely an inconvenience.
Yeah.
Like the most major thing to pivot this movie was such a convenient thing. It was weird to me with the whole Shining stuff, because that's when I thought the movie kind of got at some of its weakest and yet most interesting. I thought when they finally got to the Overlook Hotel, it was earned, because this movie is long and it takes a long time to get there. And I thought, you know what? Yeah, we've been waiting a long time. Yeah, sure. Like, cool, we're here. I'm excited now.
You're returning to Hill House.
Exactly. Yeah, and I call that in the trailer. I'm like, that's exactly what it looks like.
Like,
yeah.
this could you literally could restage Hill House in The Shining, and it would work.
When they were there, though, admittedly, I was entertained. A lot of it kind of reminded me of what they did with Ready Player One, if you've seen that movie. As much as I thought they earned getting to the Overlook, I kind of felt like they suddenly started doing a bunch of what I can only describe as like fan service and greatest hits of The Shining wrapped up in like 20 minutes.
There's a shot in this movie that I think sums it up really well. And if you don't want a minor moment spoiled, skip the next 20 seconds. The blood comes out of the elevator as Rebecca Ferguson's walking by, and she just looks. We cut back to the blood. And she's like, and she walks away. And it's like, that's how this movie kind of feels.
And she clearly wasn't there.
And she clearly wasn't there at the same time. Yeah. And so that's kind of the essence of this movie to me, is like, there is that horrifying, like, it is cool to go back to The Shining, but at the same time, we don't really get to live in it. We just kind of get to walk past all of it. Like, it's still a character-driven story. So there are moments in the hotel that I thought were really great and that made a lot of sense, because there's so much about compartmentalization and setting up boxes in your mind to keep certain traumatic things inside, and cycles of abuse that need to be broken.
This is like the big studio version of things Mike Flanagan has explored. I like the movie. I don't love the movie. I kind of just felt a little hollow. There are big moments that should feel like poetic, sweepingly emotional, and yet I never felt much towards that.
The music provides all the torque for that.
And it's not scary to me, and not that it necessarily needs to be, but in case you were wondering, it's not scary.
It ought to be tense. There's so much potential for tension. Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like there are moments where I was like, there were like sequences out of a 2.5-hour movie that felt suspenseful, but most of it wasn't. Halfway through the film, there's something that happens with Rose the Hat character, and Rebecca Ferguson from beginning to end is wonderful.
Wonderful performance.
However, she really is not a threat. There's something this movie does. As it keeps going, you're just like, there's no threat. Compared to The Shining, which this movie lends itself to, you're scared of Jack Nicholson. He's just gonna keep getting worse, and it's scary.
And the hotel, everything. Like, the whole place is just oppressive and horrifying.
But our main villain is not a threat. Abundantly clear that most of this movie, you're like, I'm not scared for her. I feel like little girl, who is good. I mean, I have some issues with the writing, but she's good. Little girl and Ewan McGregor probably not gonna have an issue taking care of it. Like, it just felt that way the whole time.
Well, and that plot line, I feel like, is something that is indicative of what we're trying to figure out in modern film right now, because his relationship with Abra, I thought, was really nice idea, and I love the concept of how it developed. And I think we're still figuring out on this blockbuster scale how to handle empowered characters like this, your young female empowered lead, because there's also a lot of tension that I think could have happened with more time to have a more character drive for her, because Abra is kind of slighted by the lack of tension coming off of Rose the Hat. They don't quite write her as a lived-in character quite as much as a lot of the other characters. There are so many of these legacy projects coming out now that are like maddening for how all right they are, and I feel that for this, but I do think this is one of the better, if not the best ones in recent memory, because it still manages to have a good amount of character thrust and at least coherently ties themes together. It has things you can compare to the world, even things that I wasn't expecting, like, abusers in power and the people speaking out to them, like in subtle ways. So I appreciate what this movie is trying to do, but it's just so frustrating because like it's all the potential is there and it's hurt by its format, I think.
I think a lot of people when they saw the trailer for this, including ourselves, thought they were just throwing in footage from The Shining, but apparently that was all reshot. And this movie makes very early on, like at the beginning of this movie, you're like, oh, never mind. This is recreated. So with that, they cast actors to play these, essentially iconic horror characters.
Yeah.
The performers are good. I have no issues with them. And
I'd have staged those different, though.
at times, though, it is just distracting because of the context. Like, you can't really win sometimes.
We're doing The Shining.
Yeah.
We're inside The Shining right now, guys. This is crazy.
I mean, you just can't really win sometimes when they're trying to embody the performance of characters back then,
Well, and we live in a very self-conscious, we saw this on the heels of that James Dean announcement, and it's weird because I was like, I'm psyched that you got actual actors to recreate this, but at the same time, it is still distracting.
You can't win. Like, you can't win with de-aging, and you can't win with putting other actors in there.
Yeah,
either way, it's distracting.
Either way,
it
it's
calls
movie
attention
magic.
to what they're doing.
Yeah.
It always calls attention. Still, like that middle chunk, even in the first 45 minutes and the finale, that's where a lot of I think the flow, tone issues kind of come into play. It's better than most, and I still like it. I'll give it like a solid 3 and a half. 3.25 out of 5 stars, I would say.
I'll give it 3.5 for the 5-hour cut. I know is probably a lot better than this.
All right, guys. Well, did you see Dr. Sleep? Did you like it? What would you have changed? Do you think that there's an extended cut out there? You guys can subscribe to The Real Rejects. Click that notification bell. We'll catch you guys soon.